Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Eye Care and You webinar 16, Understanding Usher Syndrome. My name is Sylvia Chengo. I am a campaigns and engagement intern at Thomas Pocklington Trust. Today, we are going to be listening to Emma Boswell. She's going to talk to us about Usher Syndrome, the research that's been done so far, the support pathways available, and much more. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Emma Boswell.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That's such a lovely welcome. And just for those who may be wondering, I am an Emma, I am a she. I'm tall and I've got blonde hair and I'm female. However, I've got a male interpreter, Richard, tonight. So it's a bit of a trick to listen to a man's voice, but hear me, a lady. So once we've got over that, yeah, I'm a sign language user, everybody, so I'm using sign language to communicate, and Richard is interpreting for me. I have worked for an organisation called Sense, which is a charity, and there's a big focus on deaf blindness. I've been part of Sense for the last 16 years. I'm also chair of the Usher Network, which is part of DBI, Deaf Blind International. And Deaf Blind International comes together for a world conference every 4 years, and the most recent one was last month in Canada. So as I said, I work for Sense, and I head up what's called the Usher Service. And we work with people who have Usher Syndrome, professionals and families, and we do assessment, outreach, training, pretty much anything that is involved with Usher Syndrome and where people may interact with the community, be it with professionals, statutory services, etc., etc. Now, something that we have done for the last few years is the Usher Zoom group, which is was a weekly get-together, then it became fortnightly, and now we're monthly, where we bring the community together to have a group meeting every month. And that's a group that ranges pretty widely and covers lots of different topics. The Usher Service have lots of different events running, and these have been over many, many years. Now, the next one will be the Sense Usher Service at 40, that's 40 years old, and that will be a big celebration in Birmingham at the end of September. So, Usher Syndrome, I'll start off with the basics. Usher Syndrome is a combination of, well, it's a syndrome, it's a combination of a few things. The first one is hearing loss, and the second one is RP. Now, that's also known as Retinitis Pigmentosa, which is something of an effort to spell out in sign language. It's much easier just to say RP in brief. So I hope you can get that one. So Usher Syndrome is a combination of those two deficiencies, okay? And somebody with Usher Syndrome is likely to have, how I can describe it, is like Usher Syndrome. And this is tunnel vision, rather. And this is not static, okay? This changes and it progresses as the condition advances. It's usually very, very slow. There are three main types of Usher Syndrome, and there's also Usher type 4, which is atypical. Okay, so Usher type 1, I'll start off with the first one. That's usually somebody who's born profoundly deaf and has RP, and very often has poor balance. That's the vestibular system in the ears. Okay, now it's the younger generation. That means people born now within the last 20 years are more likely to have cochlear implants and learn how to use speech to communicate. Whereas the older generation, and that's, I put myself in that category, so anybody sort of 40 plus, is likely to have learned sign language as a child because of the severe hearing loss. Usher type 2 is what I describe as hard of hearing or severely deaf, but not profoundly deaf, and a degree of hearing loss, a degree of vision loss as well. Okay, so it's sort of, you want to say partially hearing, partially sighted, or the other way around, partially blind, partially deaf. Usher type 3 is where the sight and the hearing decrease slowly, usually at about the same time. Okay, some of those people who have Usher type 3 may have difficulties with balance, some may not. Very often, those people who lose all their hearing will have bilateral cochlear implants. Okay, so that brings me to type 4. And this has only been sort of around for the last, I'd say, 3 to 5 years. And there's no particular description. It's just generally a type of Usher syndrome that doesn't fit type 1 or 2 or 3 in terms of classification. But the common thread between all four types is hearing loss and RP. Now, the condition is not the same for any two people. Even siblings have different conditions. One may have more hearing, the other one may have more sight, and the sight could be quite different as well. So in family groups where brothers and sisters do have Usher syndrome, they do not necessarily have the same level or degree of hearing loss or sight loss. Okay, that's how unique the condition is. And I know this from personal experience because I have a sister who has Usher syndrome, and our vision and our hearing is quite different. Now, of the four types of Usher syndrome, they're all what's called genetic recessive. Now, I mentioned that the Usher service has been running for the last 40 years, and in that time we've tracked research, and initially it was type 1, type 2. But perhaps 20, 30 years ago, a project was done with 200 families across the UK, and that threw up one of the genes, the Human Genome Project, and that's where it was spotted a common gene. And the first one to be spotted was type 2A, 2C, and 2D on Usher type 2. And with Usher type 1, Usher type 1B, 1C, I'm not a geneticist, so I can't explain it in any more detail, but on the strings of the gene and how they're made up, various parts of the gene were spotted and common to different types of Usher syndrome. And it's fair to say that different peoples in the subtype will have different gene defects. Now, we do know from research that has been done around the world that the most common gene is in Usher type 2, and it's type 2A. It's a subgroup, and it's one of the particular gene strings in Usher type 2A that is the highest number of people with Usher syndrome worldwide. Also, it's worth to say that those who have Usher syndromes and problem with RP will also have night blindness. They'll also have floaters and stars and flashes. And as the vision decreases, it comes into rather like a tunnel vision, but it also goes from the side and above. Some people have it the other way around, whereby they have donut vision or reverse donut vision, whereby their central vision is blocked, but they can see all the way around it. It's also fair to say as well that people with Usher syndrome have a propensity to other eye conditions, edemas, macular degeneration, cataract, to name but a few. So it's important that people with Usher syndrome have regular eye checks to keep on top of any other conditions that might start to progress at the same time. Now, if I could just rewind just a second on that, it's often the case that people with Usher syndrome, as the condition progresses, they develop cataracts, and this can be treated with really quite simple surgery. So it's important that health checks are done and the vision is checked, to keep a good eye on absolutely everything, so to speak. There's also difficulties that people have with swelling inside the eye as well. This can affect the optic nerve and needs to be kept an eye on, and medication can be given to help reduce swelling in the eyes, often called odemas. For those of you who will understand the biology of the eye, forgive me if I'm teaching you how to a granny to suck eggs, so to speak, but essentially vision comes in through the eye and it goes out through the retina and the optic nerve and it goes to the brain. Now, if you imagine at the back of the eye, it's rather like a saucer, okay? And on that saucer, which is the retina, vision comes through the retina, and ordinarily in a healthy retina, there would be like windscreen wipers on a car, wiping away any debris. Now, this doesn't happen and it doesn't self clean in an RPI. So essentially, there's the buildup of pigment, and as this gets built up on, let's say, the saucer, the vision doesn't get through the eye and up through the optic nerve to the brain. Hence, that's why there is reduced vision or tunnel vision. Okay, I want to talk to you now a little bit about how the vision changes and how hearing changes. Now, people with Usher syndrome will very, very slowly get used to vision loss and hearing loss, and they'll have to learn to adapt. And the most important thing that I say is to get the correct information from the outset. And with the correct information, get the right support. Okay? Because the more you learn, the more you understand your condition, the better things are. So that involves talking to families and being open and receptive to how the condition is changing and what the challenges are. So, for example, young people with Usher syndrome may have to face the prospect of having to stop driving. And that can be quite a milestone, particularly if you become used to being a driver. I know that people who live in the countryside and rely heavily on their cars then can't get around as they used to be able to. So then there's a consideration, if I cannot drive any longer, I need to be near shops and public transport to be able to get around so I don't become isolated. So there is the consideration of moving, perhaps closer to a town centre or somewhere more accessible, or indeed giving up the car and thinking about other methods of transport. And I'll come to that a little bit later. Also, work and careers can be something of a struggle. If you're somebody with Usher syndrome and you've worked perhaps in design or in an office, and then suddenly you can't do that anymore, then you have to think about how to use IT, information technology, to make your job more accessible, or possibly even changing job. I know of a couple of people who have been chefs and worked successfully, but then in a busy kitchen have been put in a position of, I suppose, danger is the word, with hot liquids and knives and blades and speed and communication, etc. So there is the opportunity then to think about how you can keep the same job but transfer to something perhaps less dangerous. And it's also worth talking to an employer about the condition, because it's important that the person gets the right support. The worst thing that anybody can do is quit their job and walk away in a stressful huff. The best thing to do is go to talk to the HR department or the business owner and explain what the issue is, because very often there are aids and adaptations, and there are ways of changing the job to make it more doable, so to speak. If in the event the job is not changeable, then there's retraining. There are lots of different options. Also, there are things like hearing aids, cochlear implants, radio aids, a whole range of technology pieces that can help when people lose their hearing. So somebody type 2 or type 3, if they're losing their hearing slowly, there are lots of different pieces of equipment that can help amplify sound. If your hearing aid is satisfactory, that's great. If it's not, it's important that you try out different models. And a person with Usher syndrome will be treated as a priority by an audiologist, given the vision loss. So ask the audiologist to try different pieces of equipment. Now that brings me on to eye care. It's important that people, of course, look after their eyes. They wear sunglasses. They can wear a visor to protect their eyes from the sun. Also things like multivitamins, omega vitamins, omega oils, they're all healthy to help the care of the eyes. Fish, nuts, all the usual fruits and vegetables of a range of different colours all help to improve the health of the eye. The most important thing to do is if there's a sudden change to your vision, if it's blurred or blanked or whatever, go and get it sorted out. Some people think, oh, I'll wait a while, it will come good. Don't. Refer yourself and don't ever feel bad about doing that. Refer yourself straight away. I hear lots of stories about people struggling on. The most important thing to do is maintain what you've got and look after what you've got as best you can. Ask questions, ask difficult questions of the professional who you're seeing. Ask for their advice. Ask to be referred on to a specialist if the person seeing you hasn't heard of your condition. I would also advise to join a community group like the Zoom Usher Zoom monthly meeting that we have, because lots of people join and we can share lots of experience, first-hand lived experience. There's lots of reference points to blogs and lots of opportunity to get information from other people in the same position. And it's always worth hearing good and bad stories, because it may be that you know a way around something that somebody else is facing. So getting support from people who've got the condition, getting support from people who you know, joining community groups, and actually learning about the condition now, and also learning from those who have had the condition for much longer and how they've coped. So it's always interesting for the younger people to hear the older people who have already advanced onto using red and white canes or working dogs to help them with mobility. So be sure to get as much information as you can. So the next thing I want to raise with you is the importance of empowerment and also knowing what your rights are. Okay, so if you go to a medical appointment, be it GPs or the doctors, it's important that you get the right support whilst you're there. So if you're a lip reader, you can ask for a lip speaker to assist you with communication. If you're a sign language user, you can choose the interpreter who you understand best, somebody who works best for you. It's not just a case of you are given what you get, what you're given, and put up with it. You choose who you like and who works best for you, because they've got to essentially make communication work. So be empowered about your communication. If you don't understand, say. If you can think of a way around to make communication easy, suggest it. And there are lots of different ways, such as what I call block, manual, and haptic communications. That's whereby an interpreter or a guide will help you to communicate and help you to understand by using haptic touching. And that can be something as simple as spelling the block capitals onto your palm to help you understand the word. It could be guiding, it could be social haptics, and that's touch cues on the body. And that enables you to understand the information that is being put to you. So if you are going to see anybody, ensure that you have the right support in place. Now that brings me neatly on to having a deaf-blind assessment. That sounds a lot more scary than it really is. A deaf-blind assessment is something done by the local authority, and they come to assess your support needs. Now, this must be done by somebody with a qualification. It can't just be any old social worker. It has to be somebody with a level 5 qualification. And they come to assess everything that you need and everything that you might need in the future. And on that assessment, they put together an assessment which becomes a care plan, and then the local authority have to provide that to you. Okay, if you're unhappy with any part of that support plan, you must make that known. If you want to contact the Usher service, we can certainly help you and help you liaise with the assessment officer so that you get the right assessment and the right support package in place. A little bit earlier, I mentioned the workplace. And if you're a working person, you have Usher syndrome, you can have what's called a workplace assessment. And that means that somebody, perhaps like myself, will come along and assess the whole workplace what the struggles are and what can be put right and how to put that in place to ensure that you can still do your job. Your employer cannot refuse to have a workplace assessment. That is your right to enable you to do your job as best you can. I'll just touch on the home environment as well. So for people with Usher syndrome, whichever type, what's really important is to have good lighting conditions. And I know this from personal experience because my house is well lit so I can see everybody who I live with and I can see to communicate well. Now, this is not static, as I mentioned earlier. So as my vision has deteriorated, I've changed the ceiling lights in my house. And this is something that the Thomas Pocklington Trust, I believe, can do. They can do assessments and they can make recommendations. And there are also grants available and also local authority funding available to enable you to live in your home and have the best lighting conditions possible. There are also other things that you can be given advice with, and that's, I suppose, the indoor architecture and accessibility of your home. So colour contrast. If you have a white table with a white plate, and that's not going to help. But there are various mats and things that you can be used to give a good contrast to whether it be cups and saucers on a table or cooking pans on an oven. Contrast is important, and there's lots of advice out there available to you on how best to manage your indoor environment. You can have this courtesy of an occupational health assessment by an occupational therapist from the local authority. You can ask somebody to come along and do that assessment, and you can have that incorporated into your deaf-blind assessment as well, so that all your needs are met and you're able to function in your own home. Now, of course, it's worth pointing out that your needs with Usher syndrome will continue to change. They don't stay the same long term because the eye conditions change and the hearing changes. And I know this from experience. So I like colour contrast between the surface that I'm working on so that I can see properly. I also like to have what's called bump-ons. You may have heard of these. They're like little sticky rubber buttons that you can stick onto things, and it just helps you navigate your way around the home, be it the microwave or the lights or whatever. Now, the next point I wanted to raise with you is engagement with the outside world. Now, it's important that if you have hobbies, you maintain them. Okay, it might be swimming, it might be yoga, it might be gym, it might be a sport of some kind. And some people tend to think, my eyes are getting worse, I can't hear like I used to be able to, I have to give up. Now, there are ways, there are workarounds to continue to do this. It could be that part of your Care Act assessments, you have a support worker to come and enable you to go to the gym, to go to the pool, to continue running, to continue skiing. You can still do as you used to be able to, but just in a modified way. And it just takes a little bit of thinking, because I know people who have been keen skiers, but then have thought, well, my eyes are failing, the conditions on the snow are really tough, but you can learn to tag ski. I know another chap, he's a keen runner, and he runs with a guide. So there are ways around, whilst he can't run by himself and she can't go down the slopes by herself any longer, she can certainly trace somebody. So it's important, I suppose, one, keep your hobby, don't ever give your hobby up, but have a think of how there can be a workaround. You can still have your quality of life, and it's easy to find volunteers and people who are keen to support you, and these can be paid for via your Care Act assessment. Okay, now contact with people is vitally important, most of all our families. And I know as your hearing deteriorates, as your vision deteriorates, there can be difficulty and there can be a propensity to disengage. But this is really important, and very often pets can be the link. So if you have pets, that helps you to bring you together with other people. I think networks are important. I mean, I've spoken of family, but friends are important, and also other people who have the same condition or a similar condition. And if your family can get together with other families, you can share experiences that you've all had, and that just makes it stronger. Because if you can share, then you can find resolves and answers and workarounds. So connections and networks are really important. And that means being plugged into all the charities, all the statutory services, going to the open days, um, looking out for webinars and conferences, finding sort of peers and mentors and people around who are on your wavelength, who have a condition that is similar or not dissimilar, just to help you understand yours more. If you're struggling, what we do at the Usher service, we offer one-to-one services. So we will do home visits, or we will do virtual meetings, which are all the rage these days. We'll also set up group meetings as well if there's a demand for a certain theme amongst a group of people. So don't ever be afraid to reach out to others and find out what's out there, because believe me, there is a lot. Okay. Be open to learning. Now, I've mentioned learning. I mean, starting Braille can be daunting. Starting with canes can be slightly worrying. Learning a different communication method, be it block or haptic, be open to learning. There's no point being closed off from it, because the more you learn, the more confident you get. The more you try things, the more you can rule them in or rule them out, but whichever way you advance, because then you know more. Talk to people. If you feel the need for counselling, and certainly refer yourself. You can go to your GP and make a request for counselling, specifically by somebody who understands dual sensory loss. What I mean by that is hearing loss and sight loss. And also siblings and partners, they can also appeal for hearing for support as well, counselling support or otherwise, if they feel the need for it. A little bit earlier, I mentioned research, and I remember 30 years ago being told there's no hope. That was the medic's stock answer. We don't know much, but there's no hope. Black blindness is about as bad as it gets, but we don't know. Now, 30 years ago, there was a genetic research project. It was done by Moorfields and Sense. And they worked across 200 families across the country. And that was the kickstart to genetic research. Now, that has gone worldwide. So there are lots of projects out there. Now, there is no cure, but there are treatments. There are delaying treatments to maintain eyesight. There's work on stem cells. There's work on zebrafish. There's a company in America called ProQR who were doing trials. They were following a funding trail. Sadly, that funding has come to an end, so the research is on hold at the moment. But that is not the only place. There's Australia, there's places in Asia. I mean, there is no cure, but there is no more answer like 40 years ago. There is no hope. So whilst various countries are doing various pieces of genetic research and also sociological research and psychological research as well, there are cues, there are hopes, there are possibilities. There is no cure yet, but there is no hope. I think I've ranged fairly widely. I'm unsure how I'm doing for time, but I'm guessing, Sylvia, that I'm about 30 minutes or thereabouts. If anybody needs to contact the Usher service, that's really very easy. It will come up later, but if I say now, it's Usher, USHER, at sense.org.uk. Again, Usher at sense.org.uk. So I'm going to pause there just for a quick drink of water and hope that I'm about 30 minutes in, and I throw it back to you, Sylvia.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was incredibly informative. Thank you for joining us at today's webinar. The next webinar will be on the 10th of October. It will be about white canes, the different types of white canes available, which type of white cane is right for you, and the benefits of using the correct white cane, and much more. Thank you so much for joining us today.